Casanova, A Tale of Desire. I have begun this account a dozen times, only to watch the words curl and blacken in the fire. An old man's folly, they would call it, this attempt to trap a life of smoke and firelight upon the page. But the truth is not in the facts, which are as unreliable as memory itself. The truth is in the desire. And my desire, like a stubborn ghost, refuses to be silent. It begins, as all things must, with an ending. I am an old man, a librarian in a damp bohemian castle, surrounded by the skeletons of other men's thoughts. The wind that howls outside these stone walls is a poor substitute for the sirocco that once carried the scent of salt and scandal from the Adriatic. Here, I am the Chevalier de Seingalt, a title I gave myself, a name as borrowed as the time I now squander. My world has shrunk to the dimensions of this library, my company the portraits of dead Waldsteins who stare down with aristocratic boredom. But when I close my eyes, I am not in Bohemia. I am in Venice. Can you picture it? Not the city of tourists and postcards, but my city, La Serenissima, a labyrinth of water and stone, a place of breathtaking beauty and profound corruption. The air was thick with the smell of the sea, of rotting lilies in the basilica, of expensive perfume and human sweat. Gondolas glided like black swans through canals that were the city's true, flowing streets, and secrets were traded more freely than spices in the Rialto. It was a city of masks, not just during carnival, but every single day. We all wore them, some of silk and paint, others of charm and nonchalance. Mine was the most carefully crafted of all. I was young. I was hungry. I believed pleasure was the only philosophy worth mastering. I moved through the palazzos and gambling dens, the opera boxes and shadowed courtyards, a creature of appetite and wit. I was a musician, a poet, a gambler, a spy, whatever the moment demanded. Love was a game, and I its most devoted player. Yet, for all my conquests, I was haunted by a peculiar emptiness. Each affair was a brilliant firework, lighting up the night sky for a breathtaking moment before sputtering into darkness, leaving the night blacker than before. I was amassing experiences, but I was not finding meaning. I was, though I would never have admitted it, lonely. The night I first saw her, I was fleeing the consequences of a duel, a minor indiscretion over a card game, or perhaps a glance held too long by another man's wife. The details blur. What I remember is the fog. It had rolled in from the lagoon, a living, breathing entity that swallowed the city whole. Sounds were muffled, the world was reduced to the slick cobbles beneath my feet and the occasional glow of a lamp, a fuzzy halo in the gloom. I was taking a circuitous route to a temporary lodging, my cloak pulled high, when I heard it, music. It was not the boisterous song of a tavern, nor the practiced aria from a theater. It was the sound of a single violin, played with such aching melancholy that it seemed to be weeping for all the lost souls of Venice. The melody wound through the fog, a thread of pure silver, and I, like a fool, followed it. It led me to a small, forgotten canal, a place where the water barely seemed to move. There, in a gondola that was little more than a silhouette, sat a woman. She was not playing the violin, it was a man, shrouded in shadow, at the prow. She was simply listening, her face illuminated by a single lantern. And what a face it was! It was not classically beautiful in the way of the courtesans I knew. It was intelligent. Her eyes, large and dark, seemed to be looking not at the fog, but through it, into some other, sadder world. She had a stillness about her, a profound quiet that was a universe away from the garrulous, flirtatious women of my acquaintance. She was wrapped in a dark blue cloak, but a strand of her hair, the color of aged port, had escaped its hood. I stood there, hidden by the fog, a trespasser on her private sorrow. I, Giacomo Casanova, who had charmed empresses and nuns alike, was rendered motionless by a stranger's profile. The music wove a spell around her, an atmosphere of such intense, fragile emotion that to break it would have been a crime. This was more than attraction, it was a recognition. A hook, sharp and undeniable, was set in my soul. Then, she turned her head. Her gaze did not sweep the canal, it went directly to me, as if she had known I was there all along. Her eyes met mine through the veil of mist. There was no surprise, no alarm. Only a deep, bottomless curiosity. For a long moment, we held that look, the violin crying its heart out between us. Then, slowly, she lifted a finger to her lips, not in a gesture for silence, but in a contemplative, almost wistful way. The gondola began to move, gliding silently into the thicker fog. In seconds, it was gone. The music faded, leaving only the drip of water and the frantic beating of my own heart. The woman had vanished, but the hook remained, tugging at me. I had to know who she was. Her name, I discovered over the next few days through a network of whispers and bribes, was Isabella. Isabella Foscari. A widow of a certain standing, but one who kept to the shadows of society. She was rumored to be a reader, a thinker, connected to circles that dabbled in things beyond the church's approval. Some called her a mystic, others, a melancholic. All agreed she was largely unapproachable. The challenge, of course, was irresistible. I engineered a meeting at a masked ball in the Palazzo Contarini. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax, perfume, and intrigue. I was in my element, the charming predator, my identity hidden behind a simple black botta. I spotted her across the room, unmasked, watching the dancers with that same detached stillness. She wore a gown of deep emerald green, and at her throat, a single, milky pearl that seemed to hold a soft, internal light. I approached, a clever line ready on my tongue. I bowed, introduced myself with a flourish. She turned those dark eyes on me, and the words died in my throat. "I know who you are, Signor Casanova," she said, her voice low and melodious. "The man who collects pleasures like others collect coins. Tell me, do you ever truly feel them? Or do they just pass through your hands, leaving you ever emptier?" I was stunned into silence. No one had ever looked at me and seen the emptiness so clearly. It was as if she had reached inside my chest and laid a finger on the very ache I refused to name. The game had changed. I was not the hunter, but the exposed. That was the beginning of our great, ruinous affair. Our conversations were a duel of wits and souls. We met in secret gardens where the jasmine scented the night air, in her private palazzo overlooking a quiet canal, the green water lapping against the mossy stone like a lazy heartbeat. With Isabella, it was never just about the physical, though the promise of it hung between us, a constant, delicious tension. It was about the meeting of minds. She spoke of philosophy, of the hidden currents of the world, of a secret society that sought to guard ancient knowledge from the unworthy. She spoke of magic not as superstition, but as a subtle language of the universe, a current that could be felt in the fog of Venice, in the timing of a coincidence, in the intensity of a shared glance. I was captivated. I, who had thought myself a master of the arts of pleasure, was being schooled in the art of feeling. She was my equal, my superior. In her presence, my carefully constructed mask began to crumble. I felt a vulnerability I had spent a lifetime running from. I told her things, of my fears, my childhood humiliations, the hollow man behind the legend. She listened, and in her eyes, I saw not pity, but understanding. The sensuality between us was a slow, inexorable burn. It was in the accidental brush of her hand against mine as we turned the pages of a book. It was in the scent of her skin, sandalwood and orange blossom, that clung to my clothes long after I left her. It was in the sound of her breath catching when I traced the line of her collarbone. We were building a universe of shared sensation, a world of our own making. It was romantic, it was psychologically profound, and it was the most dangerous game I had ever played. For in letting down my guard, I had given her the power to destroy me. And in the shadowy, secret society world she inhabited, destruction was never far away. The first whisper of true danger came from a man I knew only as the Falcon, a powerful, ruthless noble with a network of spies that rivaled the Inquisition's. He was a rival for Isabella's affections, or perhaps for the secrets she guarded. He was a man who collected power, and he saw my influence over Isabella as a personal insult. A message was delivered to me, not with words, but with a single, dead black rose, left on the pillow of my bed. The threat was clear. The peril only made our connection more intoxicating. The risk of betrayal, of discovery, added a sharp, metallic taste to our desire. We were playing with fire, and I, for the first time, was willing to be burned. The night everything changed began with a thunderstorm. The skies over Venice opened, and rain fell in sheets, pounding on the terracotta roofs and churning the canals into a fury. I was to meet her at her palazzo. I remember the feel of the cold rain soaking through my cloak, the sound of my own hurried footsteps echoing in the empty, flooded square. I remember the sight of her, standing by the window, watching the lightning illuminate the palace across the canal. She turned to me, her face pale, her eyes wide with an emotion I could not place, fear, or excitement, or both. "They know, Giacomo," she whispered. "The Falcon knows about us. He knows everything." I crossed the room and took her in my arms. The feel of her, solid and trembling against me, was a shock. This was no longer a game of intrigue. It was real. Her life, my life, they were in the balance. "Let them know," I murmured into her hair, my voice rough with a possessiveness I had never felt before. "You are mine." It was in that moment, with the storm raging as a fitting symphony, that our carefully built world of words and subtle magic collapsed into pure, raw need. The tension that had simmered for weeks finally broke. There, on the floor before the fire, with the scent of rain and her skin filling my senses, I learned the true difference between pleasure and ecstasy. Pleasure is a diversion. Ecstasy is a surrender. And as I lost myself in her, I knew, with a terrifying and glorious certainty, that I was a ruined man. I had found the meaning I sought, and it was a weapon that could utterly annihilate me. When I left her that night, the storm had passed, leaving Venice washed clean and shimmering under a bruised dawn sky. The hook in my soul was now a chain around my heart. I was deeper in love than I had ever imagined possible, and in more danger than I had ever known. The first act of my tragedy was over. The curtain was rising on the second. The days that followed the storm were a lesson in a new kind of alchemy. We were no longer two separate souls, but a single, volatile compound. The world outside her palazzo, the gossip of the salons, the political machinations, even the ever-present threat of the falcon, faded to a dull murmur, a painted backdrop to the intense, private drama of our union. We lived in a bubble of our own creation, a sanctuary woven from silk sheets, whispered secrets, and the profound silence of understanding. I, who had always been a creature of motion, of the next conquest, the next adventure, found myself perfectly still. I would lie for hours, watching the afternoon light paint shifting patterns on the ceiling of her bedroom, her head a welcome weight on my chest. The rise and fall of her breath was a tide that anchored me. In these moments of quiet aftermath, she would speak of her past, of a lonely girl married too young to an old, indifferent man, of finding solace in books that spoke of a world beyond the gilded cage of Venetian society. He thought a woman's mind was a decorative box, to be opened only for trivialities, she murmured one evening, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw. He never knew the landscapes I traveled inside my own head. But you look at me as if you are reading a map to a treasure you desperately need to find. It was true. With Isabella, seduction was no longer a strategy, it was an archaeology of the soul. Every sigh was a text to be deciphered, every tremor of her skin a verse in a poem I was only beginning to understand. The physical act of love, which I had once mastered as a performance, became a language. It was not about conquest, but about communion. A touch was a question, a kiss was an answer, the joining of our bodies a silent, desperate conversation against the fleeting nature of time. She introduced me to her world of subtle enchantments. It was not the vulgar magic of fairy tales, with flashing lights and incantations. It was more refined, more terrifying in its intimacy. She had small, polished stones she would warm in her hands before placing them on my skin, claiming they could draw out tension. She would brew teas from herbs I did not recognize, their fragrances unlocking strange, vivid dreams. One night, she lit a single candle of a peculiar blue wax and told me to stare into the flame. "Do not just see the light," she whispered, her voice blending with the soft hiss of the wick. "Feel its heat on your face. Listen to its sound. Now, close your eyes and hold the image inside you." I did as she asked. And when I closed my eyes, the afterimage of the flame did not fade. It pulsed behind my eyelids, a tiny, blue sun, and with it came a wave of such intense, preternatural clarity that I felt I could see the very atoms of the air dancing around us. It was a sensation of being both utterly within my body and completely outside of it. When I opened my eyes, gasping, the room seemed sharper, the colors more saturated, the scent of her more potent. She was watching me, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "You see," she said. "The world is not as solid as it pretends to be. It is full of cracks. And through those cracks, you can sometimes see the light from the other side." This was her magic. It was the magic of heightened perception, of finding the extraordinary woven into the fabric of the ordinary. Under her tutelage, Venice itself transformed. The morning mists rising from the canals were not just weather, but the breath of the city, alive and sentient. The play of shadow and light in an alleyway was a deliberate conversation. I began to feel the city as a living entity, and I felt its pulse in rhythm with my own, which was now irrevocably synchronized with Isabella's. But paradise, I should have known, is always guarded by a serpent. Our idyll was pierced by a summons. Not a written note, but an object. A single, white glove, delivered by a blank-faced servant to the door of my own lodgings. It was the Falcon's calling card. A duel. The pretext was a slight I had allegedly paid him weeks earlier at the Doge's palace, a spilled glass of wine, an exchanged glance. It was nonsense, of course. The real reason was Isabella. The message was a splash of ice water on the warm, dreamlike state I had been inhabiting. The danger was no longer a vague rumor, it was a white kid leather glove lying on my table, smelling faintly of gunpowder and expensive cologne. My old life, the life of duels and bravado, was reasserting its claim. I did not tell her immediately. I was a fool. I thought I could shield her, that I could handle this relic of my past and return unscathed to our present. I met the Falcon second in a dank, smoke-filled tavern near the arsenal. The terms were set, swords, at dawn, on the isolated Lido beach. The air was thick with the smell of stale wine and male aggression. It was a world I knew well, a world of simple, brutal codes. As I agreed to the terms, I felt a part of myself, the part that belonged entirely to Isabella, shrivel and retreat. I was putting on my old mask, and it felt tighter than before. The night before the duel, I went to her. I intended to be light, to be the carefree Casanova, to lose myself in her for one last, perfect night. But she saw through me immediately. Her sharp, intelligent eyes scanned my face, and the light in them dimmed. "You are leaving," she said, her voice flat. It was not a question. "Only for a few hours at dawn," I protested, trying to smile. "A matter of honor." "A trifle." "There are no trifles where he is concerned," she replied, turning away from me to look out the window at the dark canal. "He does not issue challenges he does not intend to win. This is not a game of cards, Giacomo. This is my life. Our life." The raw fear in her voice undid me. I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her from behind, resting my chin on her head. We stood like that, watching our ghostly reflections in the windowpane, a silent, trapped portrait. "I have to go," I whispered into her hair. "If I refuse, I am a coward, and my reputation, everything that allows me to move through this city, is ashes. I will have no power to protect you, or myself." She turned in my embrace, her face fierce. "I do not need your protection. I need you. Alive." What followed was not a night of passion, but one of desperate, aching tenderness. It was a farewell, though neither of us spoke the words. Every touch was memorization. I committed to memory the exact curve of her hip, the softness of the skin inside her elbow, the way her eyelashes fluttered against her cheek when she was on the verge of sleep. We made love not with the fiery hunger of before, but with a slow, profound sorrow, as if we were trying to fuse our very souls together against the coming separation. As the first gray light of dawn stained the sky, I dressed in silence. She lay in the bed, the sheets pooled around her waist, watching me. Her dark hair was a wild cascade on the pillow, her eyes enormous in her pale face. She did not cry. She simply looked at me as if she were trying to brand my image onto the back of her eyelids. "Take this," she said softly, holding out a small, smooth, gray stone on a leather cord. "It's a talisman. For luck." I took it. The stone was warm from her skin. I tied it around my neck, tucking it beneath my shirt, where it rested against my pounding heart. It felt heavier than it should have. I left her then, stepping out into the cold, damp air of the Venetian dawn. The city was silent, wrapped in a shroud of fog. As I walked towards the gondola that would take me to my potential death, the stone felt like a lodestone, pulling me back towards her. The hook was no longer in my soul, the chain was around my neck, and she held the end of it. I was going to a duel to defend my honor, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my only true honor, my only real life, was lying in a rumpled bed in a palazzo behind me, already feeling 1,000 miles away. The gondola ride to the Lido was a journey into a ghost world. The fog off the lagoon was thick and cold, swallowing the sound of the oars dip and pull. My gondolier, a sullen, paid accomplice, was a mere silhouette, a Charon ferrying me to a bleak shore. I stood in the prow, my hand clenched around the hilt of my sword, the chill of the polished metal seeping through my glove. But it was the other sensation that dominated my awareness, the warm, smooth weight of the stone against my chest, a tiny furnace of her faith, or perhaps her fear. I was a man divided, my body moving towards a primal, masculine ritual of violence, while my spirit clawed its way back through the mist to her. The Lido beach emerged from the gloom, a desolate strip of gray sand and sighing sea. The Adriatic was a leaden, heaving mass, its waves hissing as they collapsed on the shore. Two figures stood waiting, their forms sharpening as we approached. The falcon, tall and lean in a severe black coat, was already stripping off his own. His second, a hulking brute I recognized as a known bravo from the worst alleys of Castello, stood holding the pistol case that contained the swords. The air smelled of salt, damp wool, and impending rain. No words were exchanged beyond the necessary formalities. The falcon's eyes, the color of a winter sky, met mine. There was no anger in them, only a cold, analytical assessment, as if I were a ledger entry to be balanced. This was not about passion for him, it was about property. Isabella was a prize he believed was his, and I was a nuisance to be removed with clinical efficiency. The swords were presented. They were identical, beautiful, deadly things of polished steel. As my fingers closed around the grip, the familiar weight felt both foreign and comforting. This was a language I understood. A language of thrust and parry, of feint and lunge. A simple language, where the only question was who would bleed first. The bravo gave the signal. The falcon came at me without preamble, his blade a silver blur in the murky light. The clash of steel was shockingly loud, a sharp, discordant ring that tore the silent morning apart. He was good, better than I had anticipated. His style was economical, precise, and utterly without flourish. It was a style designed to kill, not to impress. I fell back, my boots slipping in the wet sand, parrying and deflecting. My mind, which should have been a focused point of concentration, was a riot of her. The memory of her scent, the feel of her hair through my fingers, the sound of her voice saying, "I need you." Alive. It was a vulnerability I could not afford, a fatal distraction. The falcon pressed his advantage, his blade nicking my forearm, a hot, stinging pain that bloomed through the sleeve of my shirt. I saw a flicker of satisfaction in his cold eyes. It was that flicker that saved me. It ignited the old Casanova, the survivor, the scoundrel who had fought his way out of darker corners than this. The part of me that was pure, unadulterated instinct took over. The fight changed. It became a brutal dance on the unstable sand. We circled, grunting with effort, our breath pluming in the cold air. I stopped thinking of her and became only the movement, the calculation of distance, the reading of his shoulders for his next attack. I feigned a stumble, a moment of weakness. He took the bait, lunging forward with a thrust aimed at my heart. It was what I had been waiting for. I twisted, letting his blade pass harmlessly through the fabric of my coat, and brought the hilt of my sword down hard on his wrist. I heard the distinct, sickening crack of bone. He cried out, a short, guttural sound of surprise and pain, and his sword fell to the sand. In an instant, my point was at his throat, pressing against the pale skin above his cravat. His second took a step forward, his hand going to his own dagger, but I fixed him with a look that promised death, and he froze. The falcon looked up at me, his face a mask of shock and fury. His wrist hung at an unnatural angle. He was beaten. The code of the duel demanded I could spare him or kill him. His life was mine to take. I looked down at this man who had threatened my world, who saw the woman I loved as a commodity. The urge to drive my blade home was a hot, primal pulse in my veins. It would be so easy. One quick thrust, and the greatest threat to our happiness would be erased. But as I stood there, the stone talisman warm against my sweating skin, I heard her voice not in fear, but in wisdom. This is not a game of cards, Giacomo. This is my life. Our life. Killing a man of the falcon stature, even in a sanctioned duel, would not end this. It would unleash a storm of vengeance from his family and allies that would destroy us utterly. There would be magistrates, accusations, a flight into exile. Our sanctuary would be forever shattered. Slowly, deliberately, I lowered my sword. I took a step back, my chest heaving. "It seems your wing has been clipped, Falcon," I said, my voice rough. "We are done here. Honor is satisfied." The hatred in his eyes was a physical force. This was a deeper humiliation than death. I had not only beaten him, I had shown him mercy, a currency he despised. He said nothing, merely cradling his broken wrist, his gaze promising that this was not over. Without another word, I turned my back on him, a gesture of supreme contempt, and walked back towards the gondola. The tension drained from my body, leaving me trembling with spent adrenaline and a profound, unsettling relief. I had won. I was alive. I was going back to her. But the return journey felt different. The fog was lifting, revealing a gray, indifferent sea. The triumph of the moment curdled into a cold dread. I had not ended the threat, I had merely transformed it. The falcon was not a man to accept defeat. He would now be a more cunning, more dangerous enemy, his pride wounded as deeply as his body. The world of shadows and intrigue she inhabited was now my world, and I had just made a powerful and vengeful enemy within it. When I arrived at her palazzo, the sun had barely risen above the rooftops. I did not knock, I used the key she had given me. The grand rooms were silent, filled with the pale morning light. I found her not in the bedroom, but in her small, cluttered study, surrounded by her books and strange artifacts. She was still in her night robe, her hair loose, and she was holding a small, ornate box of dark wood. She looked up as I entered. Her eyes went immediately to the blood staining my sleeve, then to my face. She did not rush to me. She simply stood, her body taut with a tension I had never seen before. "It is done," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet room. "He lives. But it is done." She placed the box carefully on the desk. "Nothing is ever done," she whispered. Then she was in my arms, her body shaking, not with sobs, but with a tremor that seemed to come from her very core. She clung to me as if I were the only solid thing in a shifting world. "I felt it," she murmured into my neck, her voice muffled. "When the steel touched you. A coldness, right here." She pressed her hand over the talisman on my chest. We stood like that for a long time, two survivors on a raft in a suddenly treacherous sea. The duel was over, but the real battle, I knew, had just begun. We had passed through one fire, but the smell of smoke was still thick in the air, and the shadows at the edges of our sanctuary now held the shape of a hawk with a broken wing, waiting to strike. The peril was no longer a possibility, it was our new reality, and our desire would have to burn all the brighter to keep its chill at bay. Victory, I learned, has a bitter aftertaste. In the days following the duel, a fragile, watchful peace descended upon us. The falcon, it was said, had retreated to his mainland estate to convalesce, his broken wrist a public testament to his defeat and my mercy, a mercy that festered in the gossip of the salons like a wound. We were the talk of Venice, but the whispers had changed. They were no longer just of a scandalous affair, but of a dangerous man and the mysterious woman who had tamed him. Our sanctuary became a gilded cage. We still met in the shadowed recesses of her palazzo, but the air was different. The pure, unadulterated joy of our early days was now laced with a constant, low hum of anxiety. Every footstep in the courtyard, every unexpected knock at the door, made her start. Her stillness was no longer contemplative, it was the stillness of a hare that has caught the scent of a fox. I, too, was changed. The duel had reforged a part of me I thought Isabella had melted away. The survivor, the strategist, had reawakened. I could no longer lose myself completely in her eyes, a part of me was always watching the door, assessing the shadows, my mind racing through contingencies and escape routes. Our lovemaking became more desperate, more possessive, as if we were both trying to brand our essences onto one another against a future that felt increasingly uncertain. It was during this time that she began to initiate me more deeply into the mysteries that captivated her. It was not a game anymore, not a diversion. It felt, on her part, like a necessity. As if she were arming me for a war she knew was coming. One evening, she led me to a part of the palazzo I had never seen, a small, windowless chamber behind a cleverly concealed panel in her study. The air was cool and smelled of dried herbs, beeswax, and old paper. Shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound books whose titles were faded into obscurity, and strange objects, a celestial globe of tarnished brass, a collection of oddly shaped glass vessels, a dagger with a hilt carved from a single piece of obsidian. "This is my studiolo," she said, her voice hushed. "My true home. Very few have seen it." In the center of the room was a small, circular table of dark wood, inlaid with intricate silver patterns that seemed to shift in the candlelight. She gestured for me to sit. "The world you know, Giacomo, the world of duels and politics and gambling debts, is a surface," she began, her fingers tracing the silver inlay. "Beneath it flow deeper currents. There are those who believe they can read these currents, who seek to understand the hidden architecture of fate. Some call it philosophy. Some call it science. Those who fear it call it magic." She lit a single candle, and the flame cast dancing shadows across her serious face. "The falcon is one of them. But his interest is not understanding. It is control. He believes knowledge is a weapon to be hoarded, a lever to move the world to his will. He sees my inclinations as a resource he failed to acquire." "And what do you believe?" I asked, my own voice low, caught between skepticism and a strange, growing awe. "I believe we are all part of a vast, beautiful pattern," she said, her eyes meeting mine, glowing in the candlelight. "And that love, true, selfless love, is the rarest thread in that pattern. It is the one force that can, for a moment, make the pattern clear. It is a kind of magic in itself." She opened a small, carved box and took out a deck of cards. They were not the common tarot, but something older, their edges worn soft, their backs painted with a complex, spiraling design that made my eyes ache to look at. "Let me show you," she whispered. She shuffled the cards, her movements fluid and practiced. Then, she began to lay them out on the table. She did not speak their names or their meanings. She simply told a story. A story of a man, brilliant and lost, a seeker of pleasures, who finds a light in the darkness. A story of a great love that is also a great danger. A story of a choice between the safety of the known world and the perilous glory of a hidden one. As she spoke, laying down card after card, a cold dread began to creep up my spine. She was describing our story. Not as it had happened, but as it would. The card showed a crowned figure falling, a tower struck by lightning, a journey across water by night. The final card she placed was of a woman, blindfolded, holding two swords crossed over her heart. Isabella fell silent, her gaze fixed on the spread between us. The air in the little room was thick and heavy. "What is it?" I finally asked, the silence stretching too tight. "What does it mean?" She looked up, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw true, unvarnished fear in her eyes. It means the pattern is shifting. The falcon is not idle. He is moving in the shadows, and his aim is not just to possess me, but to break what we have. To prove that our love is not a magic, but a weakness. She reached across the table and gripped my hand, her fingers cold. He knows the one way to truly hurt me is to take you from me. Not by killing you. By corrupting you. By making you doubt. A fierce protectiveness surged in me. He cannot. I would never. He will try, she interrupted, her voice firm. And his methods will be subtle. He will attack not with a sword, but with a whisper. He will use the world you know, Giacomo, the world of your past, against the world we have built. A few nights later, her prophecy began to unfold. I was at a gambling hall, a place I had frequented in my former life, trying to win enough to secure passage out of Venice for both of us, should the need arise. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was a man I knew vaguely, a fellow libertine and debtor named Lorenzo. Casanova. The man of the hour, he slurred, his breath smelling of wine. We heard you bested the falcon. A remarkable feat. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But tell me, my friend, are you sure she is worth it? The Foscari widow. I stiffened. What do you mean? Oh, nothing, nothing, he said, waving a dismissive hand. It is just, a man of your appetites, tied to one woman. And such a peculiar woman. They say she has driven men mad with her fantasies. That her first husband did not die of a fever, but threw himself from a window after she showed him, well, things a man was not meant to see. The words were like poisoned darts, expertly aimed. They tapped into the very vulnerabilities Isabella had warned me about, the part of me that still feared the emptiness, that wondered if this profound connection was just another, more elaborate illusion. I shoved him away, my anger a hot, immediate flare. Speak of her again, and I will cut out your tongue. Lorenzo held up his hands in mock surrender, a sly smile on his face. As you wish. I only thought to warn a friend. A man should know the nature of the cage he chooses to inhabit. I left the hall, my heart pounding with a sickening rhythm. The seed had been planted. It was a small, ugly thing, but I could feel it there, in the dark soil of my own insecurities. This was the falcon's new strategy. He would not confront me with steel again. He would use the weapons of my former life, whisper, doubt, and the seductive call of my old, uncomplicated freedom, to tear down the walls of my new one. I returned to Isabella that night, but I could not meet her eyes. When she asked me what was wrong, I told her it was nothing, just a lost hand at cards. It was the first lie I had ever told her. And as I held her in the darkness, listening to her breathe, the words of that drunken fool echoed in my mind, and the gilded bars of our beautiful cage seemed to tighten around me. The greatest peril was no longer outside the door, it was inside the room, festering in the silence between our two beating hearts. The lie I told Isabella was a crack in the foundation of our world, and through it, a chill began to seep. I, who had shared my most shameful memories with her, now hoarded a petty, venomous whisper. I told myself it was to protect her, to shield her from the ugliness of the world I knew so well. But the truth was more cowardly. I was protecting myself from seeing the doubt in her eyes, from the possibility that she might confirm the slander. The falcon's campaign of whispers was insidious and relentless. It seemed every corner of my old life had been turned into a weapon. At the opera, a former lover sighed that I had lost my spark, become domesticated. In a coffee house, a respected philosopher I admired mused, quite loudly, on how the male creative spirit was often stifled by the possessive nature of a single, intense attachment. Each comment, each knowing glance, was another stitch in a shroud meant to bury the man I had become with Isabella. The poison began to work its slow, corrosive magic. In our studiolo, her teachings that had once felt like revelations now sometimes felt like obscure games. When she spoke of feeling the energy of a room, a part of me, the old, cynical Casanova, would whisper, "Or perhaps you are just perceptive," and dress it in mystery to feel more powerful. When she placed her hands on my temples during one of her meditative exercises, a flash of Lorenzo's words, "driven men mad," would streak through my mind, and I would flinch away. She felt it, of course. She was a reader of the most subtle human texts. A distance grew between us, not wide, but deep, like a crevasse hidden by a fresh fall of snow. Our conversations, once a flowing river of ideas, now had awkward silences. Our touches, once full of discovery, became hesitant. "Where have you gone, Giacomo?" she asked me one night. We were sitting by the fire, and the flames cast shifting shadows that mirrored the uncertainty on her face. "You are here, in this room, but you are not with me." "I am tired," I said, the second light coming easier than the first. "The city wears on me." She looked at me for a long moment, her dark eyes seeing too much. The city, or its whispers? I could not answer. I merely stared into the fire, feeling the weight of the talisman stone against my chest, which now felt less like a charm and more like a millstone. The breaking point came during the Festa della Senza, the marriage of Venice to the sea. The Grand Canal was a riot of color and noise, a spectacle of power and pageantry. The Doge's gilded barge, the Bucentoro, floated like a dream, and thousands of gondolas swarmed around it. We were in one of them, isolated in the midst of the teeming celebration. Isabella was radiant, her face alight with the joy of the spectacle, but I felt detached, a spectator at my own life. And then I saw him. The falcon. He was on a lavishly decorated gondola not 50 feet from us. His broken wrist was in a sling of black silk, a stark, dramatic statement. Our eyes met across the water. He did not glare. He did not smile. He simply raised his glass of wine in a slow, deliberate toast, to me. It was a gesture of such consummate, mocking arrogance that it felt like a physical blow. He was not acknowledging a rival, he was acknowledging a pawn. He was showing me that he was still here, still powerful, and that he knew his poison was working. In that moment, the dam of my doubts broke. The accumulated whispers, the sly insinuations, the fear, and the gnawing insecurity, it all coalesced into a hot, irrational anger. Not at him, but at her. For making me feel this vulnerable. for pulling me into a world of shadows and uncertainties where I was no longer the master of my own fate. As the fireworks exploded overhead, painting the night sky in fleeting, brilliant colors, I turned to her. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, sharp and ugly. "Is any of it real?" I demanded, my voice low and strained, cutting through the oohs and ahs of the crowd. She turned from the spectacle, her smile dying. "What?" "This," I gestured vaguely at the air between us. "The magic. The hidden currents. Or is it just a pretty fantasy you weave to make yourself feel special? To make men like me, like your husband, lose our minds for you?" The moment the words left my lips, I wanted to claw them back from the air. The hurt that blossomed on her face was more devastating than any weapon the falcon could have wielded. The light in her eyes didn't just dim, it was extinguished, replaced by a vast, frozen emptiness. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, a vandal who had just desecrated something sacred. She did not shout. She did not cry. Her voice, when it came, was whisper quiet, yet it carried the weight of a final judgment. "You have let him in," she said. "You have taken his words and you have made them your own. You have let him plant his doubt in the soil of our love, and now you water it with your own fear." She looked away, towards the receding splendor of the Bucentoro. "The greatest magic was that I thought you were the one man who could see me, the real me, and not be afraid. I was wrong." She would not look at me again for the entire journey back. The silence between us was no longer just awkward, it was absolute, a void. We had faced external danger and prevailed. But this internal betrayal born of my own weakness, was a wound from which I feared we could not recover. I had not just doubted her, I had shattered the very trust our world was built upon. The falcon had won. He had not taken her from me. He had made me give her away with my own two hands. And as the gondola slid through the dark, quiet canals, the festive sounds fading behind us, I knew I had lost something far more precious than a duel, I had lost her faith. The palazzo was a tomb when we returned. The grand, echoing rooms, once the stage for our private symphony, now seemed to magnify the silence that had fallen between us. She moved through them like a ghost, her footsteps making no sound on the marble floors. She did not retreat to her bedroom or the studiolo, but went instead to the main salon, standing before the tall windows that looked out onto the black, silent canal. She was waiting. I stood helpless in the center of the room, the gilded cherubs on the ceiling seeming to mock my despair. The fireworks of my anger had fizzled into a cold, sickening ash. I had wanted to wound her, to push her away, and in doing so, test the strength of the tether that bound me to her. The test had been a catastrophic success. The tether had snapped. "Isabella," I began, my voice raw. Those words, they were not me. "They were you," she said, her back still to me. Her voice was calm, horribly calm, as flat as the water outside. "They were the part of you that has always been there, the part that fears the cage more than it desires the sky. The falcon did not create that part, Giacomo. He merely gave it a voice." She turned then, and her face was not filled with the anger I deserved. It was filled with a profound, weary resignation. It was worse than any fury. Do you think I am unaware of the whispers? She asked. Do you think I have not heard them all my life? Peculiar. Unnatural. A witch. I built a world inside myself to survive them. And for a glorious, fleeting time, I thought I could build one with you. I let you inside my walls. I showed you the hidden garden. And you have looked at it and called it a weed-choked patch of dirt. No, I pleaded, taking a step forward. The talisman felt like a burning brand against my skin. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever known. I am a fool. A frightened, vain fool. Forgive me. It is not about forgiveness, she said, her gaze unwavering. It is about truth. The truth you spoke on the canal, in your anger, is the truth you carry in your heart. You doubt the reality of my world. And if you doubt that, you doubt me. You doubt the very foundation of what we are. She walked to a small, inlaid table and picked up the obsidian-handled dagger from her collection. It was not a threat, but a symbol. She held it out on her open palm. Our love was a blade, Giacomo. It could cut through the illusions of the world. It was sharp and bright and true. But doubt is a rust that needs only the smallest crack to begin its work. The edge is gone. It can no longer cut. Tears I had not shed since I was a boy finally welled in my eyes, a hot, shameful flood. Let me fix it. Let me prove it to you. You cannot, she whispered, and for the first time, her composure cracked, her own eyes glistening. The pattern has been broken. The falcon's work is done. If you stay, the doubt will remain. Every look, every touch, will be questioned. The magic will become a performance. The love will become a duty. It will curdle into something bitter and ordinary. I would rather have the clean pain of your absence than the slow, rotting death of your doubt. She was choosing the legend. She was choosing to let our story end as a tragic, perfect romance, rather than let it decay into a mundane, unhappy affair. It was the most devastatingly brave thing I had ever witnessed. You must leave Venice, she said, her voice firm once more. Tonight. The falcon will not stop. Now that he has broken us, he will move to break you completely. There are forces aligned with him in the Council of 10. Your reputation makes you an easy target. There will be a warrant for your arrest by morning. For blasphemy, for sedition, for whatever lie he can make them believe. She had known. Even in the midst of our personal cataclysm, she had been reading the deeper currents, protecting me one last time. Come with me, I begged, a final, desperate gambit. We can start again, somewhere else. A sad, beautiful smile touched her lips. And take my cage with me? No, my love. Our tale was written for Venice. Its canals are our veins, its fog our breath. It cannot live anywhere else. She walked to me then, for the last time. She did not embrace me. She simply reached up and untied the leather cord from around my neck, the cord that held the gray stone talisman. She closed her fingers around it. I need you to do one last thing for me, she said, looking up at me, her eyes memorizing my face. You must become the legend they all say you are. The great lover, the adventurer. You must live so brilliantly, so loudly, that the story of what we were is swallowed by the epic of who you become. It must become a footnote, a whisper, a dream I had. That is how you keep it safe. That is how you keep me safe. I understood. Our love was to become her final, most powerful enchantment, a secret hidden in plain sight, buried beneath the mountain of my own legend. I leaned down and kissed her, not with passion, but with a final, searing pledge. A transfer of all that I was, all that I had hoped to be, into her keeping. It tasted of salt and an ending. I left her then, standing in the room that held the ghost of our happiness. I did not look back. I walked out into the Venetian night, a man hollowed out, a king deposed. A gondola was waiting, as if summoned by her will. As it carried me away, I saw a light go out in her window, and then another. The palazzo was dissolving back into the darkness, becoming just one more silent facade among thousands. The next morning, as a gray dawn broke over the lagoon, I stood on the deck of a merchant ship bound for France. Venice lay behind me, a mirage of white and gold rising from the water, the mists beginning to curl around its towers like loving, possessive arms. I felt the hook in my soul tear free, not with a snap, but with a long, slow, agonizing pull, leaving a void that I knew would never be filled. She had asked me to become a legend. And so I would. I would be Casanova, the lover, the adventurer, the seeker of pleasures. I would fill the pages of my life with so much noise and color that no one would ever hear the silent, screaming elegy at its core. I would make the world believe I had never loved at all, so that the one time I truly had would remain, forever, a secret between her, the mists, and me. The greatest seduction of my life would be to convince the world that my heart had never been captured, even as I sailed away, leaving it behind, buried in the only home it would ever know. I hope you enjoyed this journey through the foggy canals of Venice. If this story captivated you, please let the world know by subscribing for more tales, and leaving a comment with your thoughts. What was the most poignant moment for you? Your likes and feedback truly help others discover this work and allow me to continue creating. Thank you for listening.